As the countdown of the 50 worst moments of 2025 continues, one claim has resurfaced with explosive force, a claim so controversial, so unsettling, that critics say it redefines everything the public believes about Meghan Markle's journey into the British royal world. According to allegations discussed by commentator Sarah White, Meghan Markle did not originally come to the United Kingdom in search of love, destiny, or public service. Instead, critics claim her move was driven by a far more calculated objective: access to extreme wealth and global power. And according to this narrative, Prince Harry was not the original target. A Hollywood career at its limit. Before royal titles, palace drama, and billion-dollar media contracts, Meghan Markle was facing a quiet but brutal truth familiar to many aspiring actresses. Her Hollywood career had stalled. By her mid-30s, Meghan was best known for a supporting role on a cable television legal drama. While respectable, it was not the kind of role that led to long-term A-list status, generational wealth, or industry dominance. Auditions were fewer, competition was fierce, and Hollywood's unspoken age ceiling loomed large. Critics argue that this period marked a turning point, not toward acting, but toward strategy. Fame alone was no longer enough. What Meghan allegedly wanted, commentators claim, was permanence, financial security beyond paychecks, relevance beyond auditions, and power beyond celebrity. The lifestyle brand that revealed the ambition. Before royalty, there was the Tig Meghan's lifestyle blog. While often defended by supporters as creative expression, critics now view it as something else entirely: a trial run. The blog centered on luxury travel, elite wellness, designer aesthetics, and aspirational living, but struggled to break through in a saturated influencer market dominated by women backed by billionaire husbands, fashion empires, or legacy wealth. To critics, the Tig wasn't just a blog, it was a signal. The message was clear: Meghan didn't want to comment on luxury, she wanted to live inside it. From acting to access. As her acting prospects narrowed, Meghan's social focus appeared to shift. Less emphasis was placed on building a filmography and more on cultivating international social circles, charity galas, private dinners, and elite networking events. It is during this phase that Sarah White and other commentators claim Meghan allegedly became interested in ultra-wealthy global elites, including Middle Eastern royalty and billionaire power circles, where marriages often function as alliances rather than fairy tales. The allegation is not that Meghan pursued a specific individual, but that she positioned herself within environments where extraordinary wealth was the norm, not the exception. In those circles, money is not earned. It is inherited, protected, and multiplied. Why the UK was the perfect gateway. Critics argue that Meghan's move to the UK was not about British culture or tradition, but about proximity. London is a global hub for royal families, oil wealth, diplomatic elites, old money dynasties, international media power. To those who believe this narrative, the UK represented opportunity on a scale Hollywood could never provide. And then, there was the British royal family, one of the most recognizable brands on earth. She wanted money, the claim that won't go away. Sarah White's blunt statement, "she wanted money," continues to divide audiences precisely because critics argue it aligns with patterns seen later. Luxury fixation, brand obsession, commercial deals prioritized over duty, frustration with hierarchy, disappointment when royal life failed to deliver unlimited financial freedom. None of this is proof. Supporters insist, but critics argue it forms a pattern that cannot be ignored. Enter Prince Harry, the unexpected shortcut. Prince Harry, critics claim, represented something both powerful and limiting. He offered instant global recognition, entry into royal prestige, unmatched media protection. But he also came with restrictions: a strict hierarchy, public accountability, institutional control, personal wealth far smaller than global billionaires. To critics, this is where the story becomes truly unsettling. If extreme wealth was the alleged goal, why settle for a royal spare rather than a billionaire prince? The answer, commentators suggest, may be timing, a backup plan, or a calculated pivot. According to critics, Prince Harry may not have been the original destination, but he was the fastest path to power still available. What followed, they argue, was a rapid acceleration, a whirlwind romance, immediate branding, carefully managed media narratives, a transformation from actress to global duchess. To supporters, it was a love story. To critics, it was a strategic pivot. The question that defines the entire controversy. As the countdown of the 50 worst moments of 2025 exposes staged appearances, branding disasters, podcast controversies, and public backlash, one question now hangs over everything. If Meghan Markle truly entered the UK seeking wealth and status beyond Hollywood, was Prince Harry the dream, or was he the consolation prize? A prince at his most vulnerable. When Prince Harry entered Meghan Markle's life, critics argue the timing was crucial. Harry was not merely a royal bachelor, he was a man in emotional transition. Still deeply affected by the loss of his mother, openly resentful of royal hierarchy, and increasingly alienated from the press and palace structure, Harry was searching for meaning beyond his inherited role. Unlike Prince William, whose future was fixed and institutionally guarded, Harry existed in emotional and structural limbo. Commentators suggest this vulnerability made him uniquely open to fast emotional bonding and absolutist loyalty. He wanted to be understood, protected, and validated, not managed. Critics claim Meghan recognized this immediately. Opportunity meets access. To supporters, Meghan's relationship with Harry was organic and romantic. To critics, it was the convergence of access and opportunity. By the time they met, Meghan was no longer a struggling actress, but a woman who had studied elite environments and power structures. Harry offered something no billionaire could: instant legitimacy, global visibility, and historical prestige. Unlike private wealth, royal association could not be bought, only married into. The speed that raised red flags. From the earliest days, the pace of the relationship shocked royal observers. Public declarations, unprecedented press interventions, and accelerated integration into royal life followed quickly. Harry's public statement defending Meghan against media criticism broke decades of royal precedent. Critics argue this was not simply love, it was a deliberate escalation that made retreat impossible. Emotional commitment became public commitment, and public commitment became institutional pressure. Once that line was crossed, there was no quiet exit. Shaping a narrative before the crown. Even before Meghan officially joined the royal family, critics argue a narrative was already being built. She was positioned as a disruptor, a modernizer, and a victim of outdated systems. Rather than adapting to the monarchy, she appeared to challenge it. Royal watchers noted that Meghan did not dissolve into the institution as previous royal brides had. Instead, she stood apart, visibly branded, media-conscious, and message-driven. To critics, this was unprecedented. The media shield and the weaponization of criticism. As scrutiny intensified, so did polarization. Any criticism, regardless of content, was increasingly reframed as malicious, racist, or abusive. Journalists, commentators, and even royal staff found themselves silenced or sidelined. Critics argue this created a media shield around Meghan, one that discouraged legitimate questioning and elevated grievance into a moral weapon. Prince Harry became a vocal enforcer of this narrative, publicly condemning media institutions and defending Meghan with near-total absolutism. Love, critics say, had become leverage, when royal life was no longer enough. Royal life came with immense privilege, but also firm restrictions. No independent branding, no monetization of personal stories, no commercial exploitation of royal access. For critics, this was the breaking point. The monarchy offered status, not sovereignty. It offered tradition, not entrepreneurial freedom. And for someone allegedly driven by ambition beyond symbolism, it was never going to be sufficient. Frustration began to surface, first privately, then publicly. The exit. From duty to deal-making. The departure from royal duties was framed as a necessity for mental health and safety. Critics frame it differently, as liberation. Once outside the institution, barriers vanished overnight. Royal proximity became commercial value. Personal grievances became content. Trauma became monetizable narrative. Netflix, Spotify, publishing deals, paid speeches. The monarchy, once a duty, became a resource. Victimhood as a brand strategy. Perhaps the most controversial critique is that suffering itself became strategic. Every conflict was publicly reframed. Every disagreement became trauma. Every boundary became oppression. Critics argue that victimhood evolved into a form of currency, one protected by moral authority and amplified by sympathetic media coverage. Challenging the narrative became socially risky. Silence became compliance. A marriage that became a power unit. By this stage, critics suggest the relationship had transformed. It was no longer simply personal, it was professional. Shared grievances, shared enemies, shared financial goals. Prince Harry, once a symbol of service and resilience, had become a narrative gatekeeper, isolated from his past and financially bound to a future dependent on public outrage. The question that refuses to disappear. As deals faltered, public fatigue set in, and credibility eroded, critics began asking what Harry had truly gained. He had lost his military role, his family relationships, his public goodwill, his institutional protection. And what remained was a fragile brand built on past grievances. Which leads to the most uncomfortable question of all. Was Prince Harry a partner or a vehicle? If Meghan's alleged ambition was power beyond Hollywood, and Harry offered the fastest route to global relevance, critics argue the relationship may have been less about destiny and more about access. Not proof, not certainty, but a pattern that becomes harder to ignore. And as 2025 unfolded, with stage spectacles, branding disasters, podcast controversies, and mounting backlash, the narrative finally began to fracture. When the narrative began to crack. By 2025, something had unmistakably shifted. What once appeared to be a carefully managed media narrative surrounding Meghan Markle and Prince Harry began to fracture under the weight of repetition, contradiction, and public exhaustion. Audiences who had initially been sympathetic were no longer reacting with outrage or anger. They were reacting with indifference, mockery, and skepticism. For critics, this was the most dangerous stage of all. Outrage can be monetized. Sympathy can be leveraged. But boredom signals collapse. The staged World Series moment. One of the most widely mocked incidents of the year was the so-called World Series celebration, which critics labeled as painfully staged and culturally tone-deaf. Footage circulated rapidly online, not with admiration but ridicule. Commentators pointed to awkward positioning, forced enthusiasm, and the sense that the appearance was less about sport and more about visibility. To critics, the moment symbolized everything that had gone wrong. Manufactured authenticity, desperate relevance, a disconnect from public mood. What was intended as relatability instead reinforced accusations of performative celebrity. The Jamie Kern-Lima introduction that backfired. Another moment that ignited backlash was the introduction of Jamie Kern-Lima, framed by supporters as empowering and inspirational. Instead, critics described it as bizarre, self-indulgent, and emblematic of elite echo chambers congratulating themselves while ordinary audiences watched in disbelief. Social media reaction was swift and unforgiving. What was meant to project influence instead highlighted isolation, a small circle applauding while the wider public disengaged. The podcast name controversy. Perhaps nothing damaged credibility more than the accusation that Meghan had taken the name of her podcast from a young entrepreneur, sparking outrage across creative communities. Critics argued this incident shattered the carefully curated image of originality and empowerment. Whether intentional or not, the optics were devastating. A powerful figure accused of overshadowing someone with far fewer resources. To many, this controversy crystallized a growing sentiment. Power was being exercised downward, not upward. Media protection or media complicity. As controversies mounted, critics began questioning not just Meghan and Harry, but the media itself. Why were certain stories aggressively amplified, while others were downplayed or ignored? Why were critics framed as villains while inconsistencies went unchallenged? This led to a growing belief among commentators that media protection had crossed into media complicity. For years, accusations of bias had shielded the couple from scrutiny. But by 2025, even sympathetic outlets struggled to justify the disconnect between narrative and reality. The Thomas Skinner controversy and the MSM backlash. The countdown out of the 50 worst of 2025 took a sharp turn when it examined what critics described as a coordinated mainstream media effort to discredit Thomas Skinner after he attended a BBQ hosted by Vice President J.D. Vance. According to supporters, Skinner's sudden transformation from everyman figure to problematic personality occurred only after his political proximity became inconvenient. Critics argue this exposed a broader pattern: selective outrage, narrative enforcement, punishment for ideological deviation. To many, it confirms suspicions that media narratives were no longer organic but enforced. Public fatigue sets in. By late 2025, public response had changed fundamentally. There was no longer widespread anger toward Meghan and Harry's critics. Instead, there was a growing sense that audiences simply wanted to move on. Repeated grievances felt stale. Recycled trauma felt transactional. Royal drama felt irrelevant. For a brand built on attention, this was catastrophic. The financial reality behind the image. As deals faltered and expectations failed to materialize, critics began pointing out an uncomfortable truth: royal association alone does not guarantee long-term success. Without institutional backing, sustained creativity, or public goodwill, the commercial empire struggled to justify its valuation. What once looked like inevitable dominance began to resemble overreach. The final unraveling of the myth. By the end of 2025, the image that once dominated headlines had fragmented into contradictions. Victims with unprecedented power, outsiders with elite platforms, truth-tellers protected from questions. The public no longer argued over whether Meghan and Harry were right or wrong. They questioned whether the story mattered at all. The question that defines the entire saga. And so the exposé ends where it began. Not with certainty, but with a question that refuses to disappear. If Meghan Markle entered the UK seeking power beyond Hollywood, if Prince Harry offered the fastest route to global relevance, if victimhood became currency and grievance became brand, then was this story ever about love? Or was it about access, ambition, and a gamble that ultimately failed? Final verdict: misunderstood or methodical. Supporters will say Meghan Markle is the most unfairly treated woman of her generation. Critics will say she is one of the most calculated. History, as always, will decide. But as the 50 worst of 2025 comes to a close, one thing is undeniable. The fairy tale is over. The protection is fading. And the public is no longer listening the way it once did.